Right, I'm going to get started. So welcome everyone to our Every Company Has a Story series. I'm joined today by Tools and Ross Garner, Head of Learning, and Ross Dickie, Learning Experience Consultant. Morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Morning.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Oh, pleasure. So the title of today's session is Designing High Impact Learning Solutions for a Global Audience. So quite a sort of broad title. So to break it down, what do you guys mean when you're talking about high impact learning solutions?
But should we maybe say, just for a little bit of context, what it is that we do, first of all, and
Yes,
then I'll
absolutely.
get into that. So so Mind Tools is most well known as a website of resources for to help you develop soft skills or professional skills. So if you're a manager, you can go into mindtools.com and you'll find stuff on like having difficult conversations and resilience and communication and all those sorts of things. Mostly very small resources, just like videos and infographics and that kind of stuff. The part of the business that Ross and I do is taking that same philosophy, I would say, of making useful stuff to help people do their jobs, but on a custom basis. So clients would commission us, they'd have a very specific thing that they want to achieve, and then they would chat to us and we'd come up with some sort of high impact learning solution that we're going to create that's just for them. Hope that makes sense. So maybe you asked what high impact is, so I'll maybe throw that one to Ross and so set the context.
Sure. Yeah, you took the easy bit, which is describing the job that we do. I'll
describe
what high impact is. So I guess the reason we focus on delivering impact is that generally, if there's some sort of learning development initiative, the business is spending money on something, they're investing money on something. And so you want to see some sort of business impact for that. I think historically, and you'll find this in L&D circles, they talk a lot about the relationship between learning development and the business. I think there's often been a sort of feeling amongst business leaders that L&D doesn't necessarily deliver business impact. You're sort of creating lots of resources, courses, content for people to consume, but it's sort of hard to draw a sort of through line from that to, something that's tangible and the business can measure. And so whenever we start one of these projects, we're always thinking about, okay, what would success look like in your context? And that could be something very sort of mercenary, like increased sales, but it could also just be, something a little softer. So it could be you want to change the way that colleagues interact with one another in the workplace. And we'll go through a sort of scoping process. We can, go into that in a bit more depth to define what impact looks like in their context. But basically, we're looking for some sort of measurable outcome, usually something beyond knowledge. We don't just want people to know something. We want them to do something with that knowledge, apply it, and change their behavior in the workplace. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does completely to the question, like, when talking about high impact learning. Diving into a bit of that scoping part, how do you help them identify what high impact means to them? Because I imagine it's different for a lot of companies, or maybe they don't actually know, or maybe they could change their mind from working with you guys. Does that happen?
Yeah, I think so. I can give an example. So during the prior to the pandemic, Scottish Enterprise, who are an economic development agency, so they're a government body responsible for growing Scotland's economy, basically by helping Scottish businesses grow. So they would run these workshops face to face, where they would bring Scottish entrepreneurs all over Scotland. They would come to Glasgow or Edinburgh for a week, and they would learn about exporting. So how do you export products and services overseas? And then they would return to their businesses and go and do that. That's not really that convenient if you're running a small business. If there's only 5 of you and you have to take like a week of time to go and sit in a room in Glasgow or Edinburgh, then you come back to your business, then you've got all this stuff that you have to do afterwards that you've missed out on. So when they came to us, because of the pandemic, they wanted to create an online version of this program. And so we went through this process of working with them to do what Ross is describing, is find out what does impact look like for them. And there's impact at different levels. So kind of at the organizational level, the impact that they want to have is they want to grow Scotland's economy. That's quite a tall order. for an e-learning course, or
I respect the aim.
or whatever it is we're going to do. So how are they growing Scotland's economy? They do it in all sorts of different ways. The team we were speaking to do this by increasing Scotland's exports. I don't know, how do they do that? They do that by helping Scottish entrepreneurs export goods and services overseas by developing a strategy for doing so. So then what they were looking for from us was, how do we help entrepreneurs come up with this strategy? So we created this a blended program that was a mixture of e-learning with workshops and then consultancy sessions, where as they went through the program, they were creating what they called an export plan, which is like a strategy document that describes how each business owner was actually going to put this into place. And then the way that we measured impact was, once the program had launched, we did a survey of participants to ask, how confident are you exporting? So confidence had gone up. So that's great. We'd hope so. They just did 12 e-learning courses and 4 workshops. So I'm glad that they've got a bit more confidence. But that's like a really superficial way of measuring impact, because just because you're more confident doesn't mean that you're doing anything. Apologies, you can hear the dog in the background as well. He'll shut up in a minute.
You're continuing on like a consummate professional.
Thanks, Ross. So that's a superficial way, right? So they are more confident, right? That's cool. And then Scottish Enterprise saved money because doing stuff online is cheaper typically than doing it face to face. So that's impact as well. That's a cost saving, but it's not actually what Scottish Enterprise wanted to achieve. They wanted to save money whilst also going to the main aim, growing Scotland's economy. So the biggest impact that they had is that people who had attended the program had started selling goods and services overseas. So that was the thing that they were looking for. And afterwards, when they followed up with the people that had been on the program, they had evidence that the program had actually led to sales. So in that context, it was, the impact we want to see is Scottish businesses growing, and we can actually measure that because you could speak to people that had been on the program afterwards. But that's going to vary in lots of different contexts. If it's like a program on managing absence, you'd expect to see absence rates going down, or if it's a sales program, as Ross said, then sales going up. Like it really varies.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think sorry, Chris, just to build on that how we get to those outcomes is basically as a conversation.
Oh yeah, sorry, that was the question.
Yeah. Well, those are the outcomes, but I think like the way that we get to them is just by having a conversation with the client. Often they'll come to us. It sort of depends. It works a little differently in different organizations, but sometimes different departments within an organization will approach L&D saying, we need a course on X. And then that's the sort of point that they will end up speaking to us and say, we need a course on X. And they've maybe not thought about it much more deeply than that. And so at that point, we start asking them questions. We have a framework that we go through. So we ask them questions like, what would success look like in this context? What problem are you trying to solve? What would be the consequence of doing nothing? So if you didn't spend this money and create this course, what impact would that have on the organization? Why is this problem happening now? Who are your learners and what do they care about? What's their context?
Yeah. So
and it's through those kind of, you introduced me as a learning experience consultant, that my job title has changed a lot in the last few years. I think consultancy probably most closely reflects the job that I do is just, it's sort of having conversations, which, those questions don't maybe seem very complicated, but I think just having an external perspective, somebody to ask you those things, can often encourage you to think about it from a different perspective, because people that haven't often thought about it. And I think when you're inside an organization, it's kind of, you don't often see it in the same way someone does who's coming in, with no kind of priors, come into it with a different perspective.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So it's quite outcome focused, would you say, when you're sort of identifying what high impacts means for them usually? Yeah, for sure.
And helping the clients work out what that outcome is going to be. I think one of the questions that Ross there is one of the ones that I think surprises our clients the most is, what if we did nothing? Because it's always an option just to not do anything.
Yeah.
And I think talking about what the consequence would be of not doing anything is a really nice way of finding out what the outcome is that you want to achieve. Because it strips the solution away from it. Like, rather than thinking we're going to do this and then we expect this thing to happen, you say, well, if we don't do anything, then you get into what's going wrong, basically, and then then you can talk
Yeah.
about how you fix it without having a preconceived idea of a solution in mind.
Yeah, I love that. It kind of refocuses the mind, doesn't it? Just flipping it. What would we do? What would happen if we did nothing? So like dissecting the title, we've kind of like, looked at high impact learning. So, but what do you mean when you guys like say learning solutions? It sounds quite strategic. Is it basically, cutting it all back, like strategy? How do you guys frame learning solutions?
I think it really depends. But Ross looked like you were about to answer, so I'll let you take it.
I'm curious to know what you were going to say. So, but I'll answer, and then you can add anything. So I was going to say, I think it is strategic in the sense that it is related to those outcomes that we've defined. So we'll start with defining those outcomes before we arrive at the solution. So when we start, we don't. Yeah, I mean, often the sort of assumed solution is a 20-minute piece of e-learning. But we tried not to sort of approach with any kind of preconceived notions about what it's going to be, because a learning solution could be anything. So we used to, in our field, this is kind of reflective of a sort of broader trend in our industry. We now refer to ourselves as learning experience designers, whereas previously the sort of job that we do would have been referred to as instructional design. And part of the reason that we've changed that is that we want people to think about what we do more broadly than just creating courses. So a learning experience could be a course, it could be a workshop, but it could also just be something like a short video, or a checklist, or maybe like some sort of tool or like a wizard that you use on the job. And so it's getting people to think a little bit more holistically about what solution is going to solve the outcome or solve the problem that we've defined in the sort of scoping stage of the project. Yeah,
no, I understand that. And how do you understand the learners? So how do you find out about what they care about, what's difficult for them?
So I don't want to be flippant about your question, but my answer is kind of
flippant.
Ask them.
Ask them.
There is. I could go into a bit more depth, but that is basically it. And I think it's one of the things that's missing sometimes. So if a client comes to us and they've got they want to do a 20-minute course, what the process that Ross described, you would go through. Basically, why do you want to do that? Like, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? But there's often a lot of assumptions wrapped up in that conversation. I could think of a recent example where we were asked by a client to produce a course because no one knew what their team did. And no one seemed to care. And as we were talking about, we were kind of like, why would anyone take this course? They already don't care what your team does. Why would they now do a course on what your team does?
Harsh,
but then you pivot to, but there is a problem there because you have a team that's essentially a support function in this context. So you are able to add value to your colleagues, but they don't know that this value exists. So like a 1.5-minute animation might be a better way to do this, because you can very quickly convey the thing that you want to convey without it feeling like a course. Is that actually useful to the learners though? Well, it might be. There's various ways you can find out. So we do surveys. The surveys that we create are not like Cosmo quiz surveys. No offense to the Cosmo magazine, but we have a research team who are a bunch of academic nerd types, and they'll look at surveys that have been run in other contexts that have been that are reliable and valid, meaning that they actually measure the thing that you claim that you're measuring. So you can run that survey, and if you were to run that survey again with the same group of people 1 month later, you'd expect the exact same results, unless something had changed. So the thing that would change then would be whatever Ross or I or one of the team has done by way of a learning solution. So we want to do surveys as basically set a baseline, and then we can return to it later on and see if we've actually had an impact. So that's one way to understand learners.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful.
Focus groups, really useful, because if you have a group of people and you have a chat with them and then they start to bounce off each other, one person says, oh, this thing's been really useful to me, and then someone else says, I don't think I'd ever use that, then that's kind of, those points of disagreement, I think, are an interesting place to find out what's going on. Can also do interviews. So that's kind of, that is like the flippant sort of chat to them approach. But if you do interviews with a sort of subset of people who are doing the same job, you tend to very quickly pick up on the same themes, even if it's just, you've spoken to 3 to 5 people, something like that. You don't need to do an awful lot of them. And then sometimes we do observations as well. So we did a project last year where 2 of our team went and stood on site for 2 days each and just watched what people were doing. And that changed. I can't talk about that project, confidentiality and stuff. I can't tell you what it was, but the focus of what we were doing changed a lot off the back of just watching people in their job roles.
No, that I can see the great worth in that. I've kind of got in my head that you guys are like spies somehow.
Yeah, we are spies. That's why we're dressed exactly the same and have the same name, because it's there. We're almost like anonymous.
No, I think I would frame it as that like trusted guiding voice, that people can come to. That's how perhaps I would frame it. But I love that example about how you challenged like the client to say, maybe this isn't a learning course, maybe it is an animation. Does that happen quite often? Do people come to you with a preconceived idea of the sort of learning solution that they want, or do they more regularly come and go, you guys are the experts? How do you deal with that?
I think we typically find that with clients we've worked with, a lot of the work that we do is with repeat clients. So it's unusual for a client to work with us once and then never work with us again.
Yeah.
And maybe the first time they work with us, they'll come to us and be like, can you just create us this 20-minute course? But then, over time, going through that scoping process, maybe we end up creating something a bit different. And then the second time they work with us, they have a bit more trust in our process and are more sort of open to hearing our suggestions rather than just thinking of us as sort of order takers. They see us as adding value to the process.
Yeah, it's all about trust, isn't it? It's great to hear that, like that, repeat business. Such testament to you guys.
Oh, thanks, Krista. And I think it's not just we don't know what we're doing either, I think is the key thing to say. I know that also sounds like a crazy thing to say, but it's not like the client comes to us and says, we have got this idea, and we say, that's a terrible idea, we think you should do that. Because how would we know? We don't know that organization, or we haven't spoken to the learners. We don't understand their context, but often the client hasn't done that either, because it's kind of, but you come up with we've got this problem, we should do some training on it, and then you need to get budget and approvals and all that, and that can take quite a long time within the client organization. And so by the time it then trickles down to actually speaking to a vendor like us, often things have moved on. So that's where I think it's important that we show humility and agree as a team that we don't totally understand what's going on or what impact's going to look like in your context. And that's where all that sort of surveys and questionnaires and focus groups and stuff comes in. We can answer those questions together, we can do stuff, measure it, see what works, and then factor that into the next thing that we do.
Yeah. I'm thinking here that that all different people, even in my family who I'm genetically related to, we all learn differently. How do you combat that when you're trying to deliver perhaps a holistic solution? Is it like the levels of, do you do like different versions of the same content, but based on if someone's more visual or someone likes a video or someone likes time to read the written word? How do you combat that?
You want to do that, Ross?
I think we don't typically present multiple different forms of the same sort of piece of content in, say, video or audio or as written text. Just because if you're a learner going through that, you have to make a choice about, do you want to watch this as a video? It's almost kind of more burdensome to them, but we will try and include kind of varied interactions within if it's a piece of e-learning that we're designing. So we're making sure that what we're designing is not just all video or all text or all video or all audio. And it's, I think it's sort of the format that we choose is usually tailored to the particular problem or learning outcome that we're trying to achieve. So if this is a boring example, but if the thing that they have to do involves reading a form or analyzing a document, it doesn't really make sense for us to get them to practice that by watching a video and answering questions, because in practice they're going to have to actually analyze a document and extract pieces of information from it. So it's usually the sort of learning outcome that leads the particular format that we'll choose.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way of cutting through that noise, because I can imagine for me being a client, I would get stuck in that trap of like how it's going to be consumed versus the problem that's being trying to be resolved. So on the sort of global, learning solutions for a global audience, like obviously, different countries are very different, and that localization part, how does that play a factor in your design process?
So it depends. It's not always relevant. So some of our clients just are working in the UK or US, and that's fine. They don't care about translation. I think where we've run into problems in the past is where we haven't discussed the need for localization at the start, and then it doesn't come up until we've delivered the English version of the project, and suddenly we find out something's going to get localized, and that can be very expensive, because if we've decided to do something with lots of audio or video interviews or animation or something like that, it's just really expensive to get a voice actor in every country that you're localizing for to come and redo that. And then if it's animation, it takes longer to say things in certain languages than it does in English. So then you need to adjust the timings of the animation. So then there's like animation work that has to go on as well. So I think the way that we would approach it is to ask at the outset if there's a need to have content delivered in multiple languages, or for different regions as well, and then design that into whatever we're doing. So the easiest thing to translate would be text. So we might focus more on text content if we're translating, but also if we were doing, say we were filming videos, like we do quite a lot of video production, where we would go on site and film people in person. If we want to have representatives from lots of different countries, maybe we would just record them online to make sure that people feel represented, because it's not just the translation that's important. There's also the making sure that whatever you're producing resonates in the cultural context, so then people are going to consume it. An example of this would be, we did a project with Burberry that was shortlisted for a couple of awards. It's a case study about this on our website. Same with the Scottish Enterprise one. That's why I can talk about these projects. But that was a diversity and inclusion project. Now, diversity and inclusion looks very different in the US, which where conversations tend to focus on sexuality and race, versus their Asian context, where you have a more homogenous racial makeup. But you tend to talk more about gender. So we had to make sure that what we were doing reflected the different contexts within which the content would be consumed. And I would say, because we're on a Comtech webinar, that Comtech are an ideal partner for this. They are the easiest, and I'll just say that because we're here, they're the easiest people to work with, because translation, from my point of view, is a nightmare. I have been involved in managing myself, and it's a right pain. So having someone like Comtech to help is a huge benefit for us.
Yeah, that's good to hear. It's good to hear. So when you've finished a project, how is it, can you give us a few examples of how the business has been impacted by the learning? I know you mentioned Burberry and Scottish Enterprise. It'd be great to hear a few more.
Yeah, so with the Burberry project, which is ongoing actually, so that's split into 4 different episodes, and I think that's been useful actually, because it's allowed for sort of practices to be embedded over time. But they've seen quite a few changes. I think one of their sort of outcomes was, with it being diversity, equity, and inclusion, was just to kind of facilitate conversations and have people feel more comfortable talking about these issues with their colleagues. Being a global company, they also didn't have a sort of common or sort of shared understanding of what D&I meant for folks at Burberry. As Ross was saying, like depending on which location colleagues were located in, they maybe have different assumptions about what D&I was about. And so one of the outcomes has been that they've created sort of book clubs. They have this resource library that people have been using to sort of self-serve resources. So not just things that we're pushing out to them, but things that they're pulling themselves. And Yeah, were there besides the book club? What were the other things? A sort of film club as well.
There's a film
Ross,
club. Yeah, there was also like a they created a resource library that
Yeah.
had tools that you could use to, in particular, practice allyship at work. Now, the reason I bring that up is because people were constantly revisiting the resource library. They saw people went to it multiple times, which would be an indicator that people are trying to take action and they're looking for resources to help them do
Yeah.
so. And I think it's kind of a nice example because often when you're trying to measure impact, it is very difficult. So like sales is like the easy one because you have like, do sales go up or down for those people who have used whatever we've created. For a lot of the kind of cultural, the kind of softer kind of behavioral bits, it can be more difficult to measure. So you're looking for proxies all the time. So accessing a resource library would be an indication that people are wanting to take action. We also did a project with UMass Memorial Hospital in the US around standards of respect, which was basically about how they call them caregivers. We was, I think, probably in the UK think of them as like healthcare workers. How they respect one another and how they show respect to patients. So they did a survey afterwards to measure the impact of that. We've recently completed another project on cybersecurity. Now, your ideal measure here would be that you have cybersecurity incidents happening. That's your baseline. And then you launch whatever it is that we've produced. And then at the end, cybersecurity incidents have gone down. But a lot of organizations don't have a lot of cybersecurity incidents, and they don't want them, obviously. But if you don't really have them, it's quite difficult to measure the success of a program. So this is one of the examples where we did a before and after survey, designed by our insights team, where the before survey set a baseline, and then afterwards we ran that survey with people who had engaged with the stuff that we'd created and people who hadn't. And the people who had engaged, their behavior around cybersecurity had improved. It had changed, and we could measure the difference between those two groups. So it goes back to what Ross was talking about with scoping earlier on. It depends. It depends what it is that the client organization is trying to achieve. And then how we measure that is going to be based on that context and what data is available.
So switching gears from like you guys specifically, where do you see like learning and development industry going? Like we've come out of a crazy few years. We're kind of like, getting back to normal. Where do you guys see your industry headed over the next like 5-10 years?
Dangerous thing to make predictions, but
yeah. So I think I don't know what Ross thinks about this. So I think short term, like just in the current economic environment, and this has been a kind of persistent issue for L&D, is what we were talking about earlier. It's demonstrating business impact. So I think if as budgets tighten for a lot of organizations, I think there's going to be an increasing focus on activity within learning development and the programs that they're running, and showing that they are adding value to the business and not just kind of creating stuff that doesn't get used or that isn't actually achieving anything. I think that's going to be in the short term increasing focus for most organizations. Looking further ahead, it's a little dangerous to make predictions. I'm really excited about artificial intelligence. Been thinking a lot about that recently. And I think there's a lot of scope to apply it to the work that we do, either in sort of tailoring content to learners so that it feels sort of more individualized, or just sort of in sort of creating like even something like as simple as creating a sort of more interactive learning experience. So if anybody's used ChatGPT, you'll know it's like pretty close to speaking to an actual person. And often we'll include, so in that Burberry example that we talked about, you have interactions with colleagues, it's about how they interact with one another. But those interactions are all predefined because it's built in an authoring tool. We have to have a set of options they can choose from and map out the different paths that conversation can take. And don't know what this would look like, don't know what the mechanics would be, don't think these tools exist yet, but I think it'd be really, you could see something like that being really impactful, where you're actually practicing having a conversation with something that can respond in ways that seem a bit less predictable than a piece of training or what people are used to consuming online. I'm working on a project on negotiation at the moment, and that has the same kind of issues where part of negotiating with a real person is you don't really know what they're going to say, and they behave sometimes unpredictably, and you have to respond quickly. And so I think that there's a lot of scope to use those sort of large language models in that context. But I think AI is going to change probably everything in business, and it's definitely L&D isn't going to be insulated from that. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space.
Yeah, I would have said something similar. I think that as we do look like we're going to be entering a recession and period of slashed budgets and so on, I think the easiest thing to cut is L&D. I mean, the fastest way to save money in an L&D department is to stop running workshops straight away. In a way that's good for us typically, because they're doing something digital, particularly if you get something like our toolkit product, which is just loads of 2,000 resources to help you perform at work. Rather than go on a course on difficult conversations, you could just look at a top tips on having difficult conversations. It takes 5 minutes and it's there. You don't need to run the course anymore. I think on the custom side that we're doing, because we're creating stuff for clients, the question that we'd always ask is, what's the smallest amount of work that we could do to address whatever this issue is? Because people are time poor and budgets are time. So I think always trying to think about not spending money, but having impact for the money that is spent, I think would be the direction of travel. And I agree on all the AI stuff as well.
Yeah, no, we're seeing it. You're right that we're seeing it in our industry, in the sort of localization industry as well. And like we always work alongside AI. We've seen that that nothing can replace that human element and that creative element with the localization. Not yet with the look. I know Skynet is coming. But yeah, it's a tool that we don't shy away from, that we supplement with. But yeah, and I think those organizations who recognize it as something to enable people to get back to their day jobs, to free up the humans, I think is is how I try to view it.
I think you have to. Yeah. There's if AI can do something faster than you, even if it's not quite as good, it's quite difficult to compete with that. And so then you have to ask yourself, where can I add value here?
Yeah.
I think we're all going to be working that out over the next few years.
I know.
Like a lot of learning development activities focused on correcting behaviors or changing behaviors that are just inherent to humans, because we're driven by various sort of complex motivations and priorities, which wouldn't affect artificial intelligence. You could see machine learning systems just doing things that humans currently do much more efficiently. And so the things that L&D focuses on are going to change. Like, I don't know if that then starts to, get into, this is a bit Skynetty, but like thinking about, who's teaching the machines or sort of setting priorities for the robots seems like something that's probably outside of L&D's skill set. But I think what L&D focuses on is going to look very different. I might have more of a sort of soft skills focus where you would want kind of human interaction, I think, rather than speaking to a sort of intelligent machine. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
It's not totally outside of L&D's focus, though. I know we're going off in a complete tangent now. Insofar as so if you asked like ChatGPT just now to write you a course on anything, it would do a pretty good job. What it wouldn't do is say, "Are you sure you need that course?"
Yes. Yeah.
Is it a bad idea to do this in the first place? Maybe there's a better option. I think that's where we can add value. For sure. We human beings.
Or exactly. We Mind Tools.
Or we Mind Tools.
Yes.
Mind Tools business.com.
So on that note, does anyone on the live webinar have any questions for Ross? Or Ross, feel free to use the Q&A functionality. I think I've had one from Elaine. Are you finding that mobile learning solutions are on the increase, apps, etc.? And is this a good thing for cross-country cultural learning and training, or more complex to deliver than we first think?
I know what I think. Do you want to take a stab, Ross?
Sorry, I'm going to read the question because I sort of lost track of it. Mobile learning solutions are on the increase, apps, etc. I'm actually curious what Elaine means by whether it's a good thing for cross-country or culture learning and training. In terms of the sort of mobile space.
This is a classic Ross Dickie response. He can't help himself.
Dispute the premise of the question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you want to add more detail, then feel free.
Yeah,
I could answer the first part. I don't see a lot of mobile learning solutions, to be honest, certainly in the context that we work in. So most of the people that we work with are office-based or desk-based workers. So we don't think an enormous, well, is it fair to say we don't think everything we do is responsive, so it'll work on a desktop, laptop, tablet, or mobile. I think you do have to do that because then it gives learners choice over where they engage with that content. I don't hear a lot about mobile learning anymore in the way that we used to. I think it used to be all the rage, but for people who are desk-based, it just doesn't come up very often. Now that's, I think, different if you are maybe say that you drive for a living, or maybe you'd be looking for like podcasts or something to listen to, or if you work in retail, maybe you'd be looking for like 5-minute like things that you can do on your phone. I see Elaine has expanded. So do you see mobile learning solutions as easy to implement across countries from a content and tech POV?
I think the tool, I think the tools that we use make it pretty easy. I wouldn't say it's necessarily easier to distribute mobile. I mean, I think one of the things that we do factor in for projects that we work on is, in certain contexts, there's a project we worked on for a large tech company, which was focused on the sort of audience for them were it was a global audience. So this was a project we worked on with Comtech on. And in certain areas, we knew people were more likely to be accessing the content from a mobile device just because they wouldn't have access to a desktop. They weren't office based. They maybe didn't have sort of high sort of bandwidth or sort of high speed broadband. And so we had to kind of design with that in mind. And so I think in that sense, it's sort of, I mean, I think mobile does make it easier, and it's something you have to factor in certain contexts. We sort of assume that desktop is the default for most of the organizations we work with. It's not always the case. In that Burberry example we were talking about, we knew that, for example, retail colleagues were going to be, they're working in a store. So we needed a way for them to access the content in between shifts or on breaks. So it needed to be responsive and work, effectively across tablet and mobile, because that's where they were most likely to be accessing it. So I think it kind of comes back to the sort of scoping process we were talking about at the beginning is, what is the learner's context? Are they office based? If so, they'll probably be using a desktop. And if not, they'll likely be accessing it on mobile or tablet, and then factoring that into the design process. But everything that we do is responsive as a default.
I think that's why we've given a slightly fluffy and vague answer, because the stuff that you were talking about there is like assuming a low bandwidth, like so optimizing for data transfer, and then not having huge screeds of text, conversational language, as little as possible, shorter resources if you can get away with it. These are all things that are not just good for mobile, but they're also just good for workplace learning in general. So I think that's maybe why we don't think about mobile learning solutions that much, is because the default is that whatever we're creating would work on any device. And the principles for designing for mobile, I don't think are that different anymore from designing for a desktop.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. I have one, while anyone else would like to answer, anyone, or Elaine's come back with thank you. Good answers. I recently read an article that mobile apps were on the increase for 2 areas, health and medical, and learning and development. So really good to get your thoughts.
Oh, it's always possible that Ross and I don't have our finger on the pulse. So if you have a link to that article, then I would love to read it.
I had one. What would you say are the common misconceptions through, working with guys like yourself? Do you ever find that kind of like, no, that's not what we would do or how we would deliver it?
Yeah, I think the most common thing we get is we get sent a PowerPoint and get asked if we can turn it into a course, and to which we can, but depending on the size of the PowerPoint, it's often expensive. And what's the point of doing it? The PowerPoint already exists. What is the PowerPoint not achieving that a course would achieve? So that would normally be the start of a conversation, and then sometimes clients are receptive to that and sometimes not.
Mm-hmm.
And to come back to our AI conversation, that seems like something that eventually AI is going to be able to do pretty effectively. But it's, to Ross's point, it's not going to ask you, do you want to do this in the first place? What are you trying to achieve? What do your learners care about? If you want them to follow a process and you already have this PowerPoint deck, what makes you think that a piece of e-learning is going to be any different apart from the fact that you can track it? So I think that probably is. I think the perception is often that we're going to focus on content. I think a lot of the times the conversations will focus around, here are the things we want people to know, here is the content we want this section to cover, and we all always try and bring that back to what the outcome is. And so if a particular piece of content isn't directly related to the outcome, it's maybe nice to know or sort of nice to have, but it's not strictly necessary. And actually it's maybe going to sort of affect cognitive load and prevent them from learning or remembering the things that are actually related to the outcome. So I think those are probably the two big things.
Yeah, I was laughing there because what Ross has alluded to is that the thing that you're making, it could have a positive impact. That's what we'd like, but it might also have a negative impact, which is why it's worth asking, what if we just don't do anything at all?
Yes. Yeah. But I like how we've come full circle. So I don't think there are any other questions. So to that end, thanks very much for joining, and I'll make sure that everyone on the webinar gets the recording asset as well. But thanks again, guys. It's been really interesting. I've definitely learned a lot about the L&D sector. And hopefully see you at World of Learning next week if you're going.
We are not, unfortunately, but we will be Learning Tech a little bit later in the year. And if anyone does want to have a chat, then you can find us on LinkedIn and Twitter. And then mindtoolsbusiness.com is our website. So, but probably easiest just to LinkedIn us, send us a message there.
Yeah. Fab. Well, thanks very much, guys. Have a great day.
And
thank you, you too. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.